through the generosity of our partners in progress. College at the Crossing in Bella Vista. A.G. Russell Knives in Rogers. The Arkansas and Missouri Railroad in Springdale. The Bank of Gravette, caretakers of the Arkansas spirit. Discount Smokes and Liquor in Jane, Missouri. Smith Family Chiropractic Clinic in Bentonville. V. LaRue Gifts at Village on the Creeks in Rogers and downtown Bentonville. Simmons Suites in Bentonville. Kaufman Realty in Bella Vista.
This is Petra from Boca Raton, Florida, and this is the Out of the Norm Show, where the stories are all about you.
Hi, welcome back to the Out of the Norm Show, where the story's all about you. As I said earlier, if you've ever been to downtown Bentonville, it's a beautiful area with lots of different things, but one of the major attractions and the beautiful spots is this Compton Gardens. I have with me today a new friend who knows everything about the whole business of Compton Gardens, Mr. John Spurgeon. John, I appreciate you taking time to be with us.
Glad to be here, Norm.
And tell us all about Compton Gardens. How long has this been a public garden?
Well, it was deeded over to the Peel Foundation in 2002, but we had to do some work to get it ready, so it wasn't open to the public until 2005.
Okay.
But it's been a public garden open from sunrise to sunset every day of the year since 2005. And we have the home of Dr. Neil Compton and about 6.5 acres of gardens with about a half mile of paved trails going throughout, where we have over 250 varieties of native plants and over 55 species of trees.
Wow. And we're going to see some of those plants a little bit later in the morning, aren't we?
We are. We're going to see some things that are in bloom that are nice this time of year, and some that are interesting and have good stories behind them.
Good.
But we also want to talk about Dr. Compton and how all this came to be.
Dr. Neil Compton. Now, he was a physician here in Bentonville, right?
He was. He was a local physician here on the town square. He was born in 1912. To put that in perspective, that was the same year that the Titanic sank, a couple of years before World War I began.
Right.
But he was born over west of Decatur, and his father, who came to be the county judge and county probate judge for 6 terms, moved the family over here to Bentonville when he was about 11 years old. So he went through Bentonville Public Schools, graduated from high school in 1931, and went on into the University of Arkansas, where he graduated 4 years later with a degree in zoology and geology.
Oh, that's interesting. But then went to medical school after that, rather than
he did go to medical school. He got married, and he went to the University of Arkansas Medical School in Little Rock. Spent 4 years there, and when he came out, he was sent to New Jersey for his internship. And then he came back here, and he was a public health officer for a couple of counties here in Arkansas.
Right.
So when World War II broke out, he was in the United States Navy, and he was sent to Guadalcanal, where he certainly probably had to deal with many horrendous injuries during the wartime.
Sure.
But it was during that time, while he was in Guadalcanal, that his wife wrote to him about this particular property being for sale. She was actually living across the street with her mother, and it was up for sale, and she wrote him and said, that property we've talked about before has come up for sale. But they didn't buy it at that particular time. It would be a few years later that they would actually buy the property. But his wife and his mother-in-law actually purchased this property in 1952.
Oh, okay.
And he had come back, and he had been through his residency at St. Vincent's Infirmary in Little Rock, where he'd specialized in obstetrics. And he came back to the square here in Bentonville and opened a family practice where he also delivered babies.
And we're only a couple of blocks right off the main square.
We're 3 blocks off of the main square, so he could have easily have walked to his office every day. So in 1952, the family decided to build a house on this property and went in search of an architect and found a man by the name of Cecil Stanfield in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And he designed this house in what was called post-war modern America. And it has an organic type design. And this, for its at that time in 1952, this was a tremendous house because you had 3 bedrooms, a mother-in-law wing, 2 fireplaces, 2 stories. This was probably close to about 8,000 square feet of house at that particular time. And the interesting thing to me was that when he was building the house, he had 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, his mother-in-law, his wife, and he said everybody could have something special that only they wanted in the house. So, of course, Dr. Compton wanted a garden. So he had an atrium built that went from the bottom floor to the top floor. His wife had areas to entertain, which she wanted. His mother-in-law wanted her own wing, which is on the far end of the building. The eldest daughter wanted a room with a view on the corner. The middle daughter wanted a secret room. And the boy wanted cowboy furniture.
All right.
So everybody got what they wanted. The family moved in on December the 10th, 1952. And so this was their home for many, many years until it was given over to the Peel Compton Foundation in 2002.
But Dr. Compton's passion about Arkansas and some of the things about the natural state was in particular his drive on the Buffalo River.
It was.
Let's talk about that a little bit. How did all of that come about? Because I mean, it was the nation's first national river.
It was in fact. He was very adamant about the fact that if you went outdoors and you engaged in nature and you hiked and you walked outside and you camped and did various things, you were a much healthy person than if you just stayed at home and did nothing. So he was very active outdoors and actually had floated the Buffalo himself back when he was a freshman in college. But along in the 50s, the Corps of Engineers came along and decided that they wanted to put some dams, 2 dams in particular, on the Buffalo River. And so there arose 2 camps, one of those that wanted to have the dams and one that didn't want to have the dams. And Dr. Compton felt very strongly about the fact that dams would disrupt the beautiful nature of the Buffalo River. And so he set out to take pictures of the area and go around the state soliciting support to keep the Corps of Engineers from building dams on the river. And he founded, with others, the Ozark Society and became the president of the Ozark Society with the mission to keep the Corps of Engineers from building these dams. Eventually, legislation was introduced by our 2 senators, Fulbright and McClellan, along with John Paul Hammerschmidt, who was the representative at that time, to keep the Corps of Engineers from damming the river. And on March of 1972, President Nixon signed the legislation making the Buffalo River the first national river in the United States. And it was the work of Dr. Neil Compton that made that come about.
Was there a lot of opposition because it was a very poor part of Arkansas and there would have been a lot of farmland bought up and property displaced?
There was, because people were in a position where they could have made some money by selling the land to the Corps of Engineers. Because there were many people who wanted the dams to be built. So they could have sold land and made some profits off of property that they had. So there were 2 camps at that time, one that wanted it and one that didn't want it.
But Dr. Compton was able to muscle through, and
he was able to spur the people into getting in contact with their legislation to say that maybe it was more important that we have a beautiful national river that everybody can enjoy rather than selling some land off to make lakes.
And that was over 40 years ago that this happened, and now it has spawned, not only kept the river pristine, but it's also spawned a whole new area of tourism over there, hasn't it?
It has. It's one of the very popular sites here in Arkansas for people to come and float the buffalo. That's a big thing.
Sure is.
And people enjoy the outdoors. And some of the plants we're going to see in the garden today came from the Buffalo River area. And so that natural area that he saw, he also wanted to bring into the gardens around his house. And interestingly enough, besides this property, he purchased an additional 20 acres on the backside of the property that he called his Crystal Springs Native Garden. And he would work out in this garden, and he might get a call here at the house about needing his medical advice. And his wife would come out, honk the horn of the car, and he would know something was up, and he needed to come back from his native garden and come back and deal with this.
Deliver a baby somewhere.
Right. And he sold that property in 1973 to a man by the name of Sam Walton. And today, Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art is being built on part of that property.
How exciting. Well, we're going to go out and take a look at the gardens, and John's going to give us some ideas and some stories, and I think you're going to learn a whole lot, so please don't go away. We're not going to take a break. We're just going to take off walking, so join us in the gardens. We're on our way.
First plants I want to show you is the wild ginger. The root from this plant is used as a spice, but I think that one of the things that I like most about this plant is that the flower actually blooms on the underside, and ants are used to pollinate these flowers. We often think that moths and butterflies are the only ones that do any pollination, but ants pollinate this plant. The Native Americans used this plant to cook with, but whenever they came across an animal that had died, and they didn't know how the animal had died, they cooked with the native ginger so that any evil spirits in the plant would be, in the animal, would be taken away. So it was a special plant for Native Americans. The plant right behind this is called the nine bark, and it's got a little flower on it. That plant, you can pull off the bark for 9 layers and still not hurt the plant. Native Americans also thought that the plant that had bark that peeled off would probably be good for a compound to put on their arms to prevent the flaking of skin. Let's walk on down and look at the statue, or the sculpture, known as the Group of Bears. Compton Gardens was lucky enough to be given, temporarily anyway, the sculpture of the Group of Bears. This is one of the first sculptures purchased by Crystal Bridges, and it's here on the entryway to the walkway, the pedestrian walkway to Crystal Bridges Museum of Art. This sculpture is by Paul Manship. Now, he was commissioned in 1926 to build a gate for the Bronx Zoo in memory of the explorer and big game hunter named Rainey. He created a gate that was over 30 feet wide, or tall, and over 40 feet wide. And on this gate he placed various animals that could be found within the zoo. And in there he had individually a bear standing, a bear sitting, and a bear walking. And he took that design several years later in 1932 and created the sculpture, the Group of Bears, where he has a bear standing in the middle, and on one side he has a bear sitting, and another he has a bear walking. He placed it on a pedestal with ivy. Now this is a duplicate of other sculptures that he has made identical to this, but Paul Manship is probably most well known for his sculpture at Rockefeller Center. Every Christmas we probably see some show at Rockefeller Center where they're ice skating on the rink. At the back of the rink there's this gold statue of Prometheus with his fire in his hand as he's flying through the air. And as the story went, Prometheus stole fire from Zeus and brought it down to man. But that sculpture of Prometheus at Rockefeller Center is probably Paul Manship's most famous work. So we probably know about Paul Manship long before we ever had the Group of Bears, but we just didn't know it. But today these bears overlook the pedestrian walkway to Crystal Bridges, and kids are just magnetized by these bears as they come in and want to touch them, sit on them, and ride and walk around. And we're very glad here at Compton Gardens that they're here watching over our gardens and those who come here to visit us. But now let's go over to another section and look at some other things. In the meadow area of the garden right now, and this area is now filled with wildflowers that haven't bloomed yet, but will in another month or so. But this was the area where Dr. Compton had his vegetable garden when he lived here. But now we have it filled with wildflowers, and they'll fill the area later on this summer. But right next to it, we have the catalpa tree. Most people don't like this tree. It's in bloom right now, but it has large seed pods, it has worms that grow on it. But this happened to be the favorite tree of Thomas Jefferson, and he thought every city in the country ought to have a catalpa tree. Now, one of our other trees that we're really fond of is the Osage orange, and it's back over here to the left. And this tree is the only tree that termites do not eat. But the Native Americans used the Osage orange for their bows because of its tremendous strength. So we have an Osage orange that we have right here next to the meadow. And these are just a couple of the over 55 different species of trees we have on the property here at Compton Gardens. But there's some other things I want to show you in some of our drier areas. So let's go down to the Bluff Glade and take a look there. Norm, this is an area we call the Bluff Glade, and this is one of the more drier areas that we have. The water runs off, so we need plants here that don't need a whole lot of water. And one of the most beautiful ground covers we have is the Missouri primrose. It's full of these beautiful yellow flowers that can grow up to 5 inches across. This plant is also known as the Ozark sundrop. But you find it not only here in Arkansas, but also Missouri, Texas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, and Kansas. It's a very beautiful plant, and one that opens up in the evening. The unusual thing about the Missouri primrose is not the beautiful yellow flower, but the fact that moths at night pollinate this particular plant. Norm, most people don't realize it, but Arkansas has a native cactus, and it's the prickly pear. It has a bright yellow flower, but it'll have a nice red fruit on it. It's used for making jams and jellies. The only thing, you have to be careful because it's got a thorn on it with a reverse kind of hook on it, like a fishing hook. So you don't want to get the thorn in your hand because it's kind of hard to get out, but it makes a great jelly. It's the prickly pear. Buckeye is in bloom right now, and it's said that the seed from the buckeye is good luck, especially if you carry it in your left pocket. It has a bright red flower on it. It's different from the Ohio buckeye. The Ohio buckeye has a white flower and is much larger. But we have the native red buckeye and enjoy it very much. Just on the other side of it, though, we have an interesting plant which we call spider wort. This particular plant only blooms one flower each time on a stem, but it'll have over 20 flowers. So if you were to clip the end of this leaf, a white little sap would come out of it, and you could pull that sap out just like a spider web. Sometimes they call this cow slobber, but it's a very beautiful ground cover. It'll bloom now for the next several months. On the other side of our trail here, we have a plant called Blue Star. Named that way because the flower on the end is shaped like a star. It's a very beautiful kind of flower. And right next to it, we have the morning star sedge. And if you can look at these plants, this is actually the bloom. It looks like an old kind of war weapon that might have been used in the Middle Ages, but it's a star-shaped grass. It's very beautiful along these walkways. But we need to go down here towards Cindy Springs, and that's an interesting. Norm, here along the Bluff Glade we also have the Columbine. I like this particular plant because of its shape. hummingbirds are used to pollinate this plant, but it has an interesting story behind it too, because Native Americans thought this plant was a love potion, and often they would take the plant and rub it in their hands. But they also thought because it had a similar look to an eagle's claw that it brought good luck. So they'd also rub it in their hands before they went to a council meeting in the hopes that it would help them during those meetings. So Columbine is a pretty interesting plant. Norm, right next to the Columbine, we have a Paw Paw Tree. And that's not because it's the grandfather tree, that's because it produces a fruit. And the Paw Paw fruit, if you were to break it open, you'd find that the seeds in it look just like the paw of a bear. So it's called the Paw Paw Tree. And it usually grows in the shade of other larger trees, as you can see here in the garden. But one of the interesting things about the Paw Paw Tree is it's the host plant for the zebra swallowtail butterfly, the only plant that the caterpillars really enjoy. So a beautiful black and white butterfly with red dots on its tail will be around here later on this summer because of our Paw Paw Tree. Norm, we're in an area we call Cindy Springs. Now it's kind of interesting because pioneers, when they came across the spring, the senior male in the family got to name the spring. Well, this area was owned by William and Lucinda Springs during the Civil War, and they found this spring. But it wouldn't be right to name a spring Spring Springs. So they named it after their eldest daughter, Cindy. And today, this is Cindy Springs. And we have water all year round because of this spring. And planted by Dr. Compton, directly across from this spring, is what we call our umbrella magnolia. The umbrella magnolia has these beautiful leaves that spread out like an umbrella, and it produces a nice white flower. Not exactly like the southern magnolia, and not nearly as nice to smell. But this tree was planted by Dr. Compton right here on this location. We're very proud of it. But we need to move on if we're going to see more of the garden. So Norm, if you will, let's head on up by the dry stream bed and see what we can see up there. Norm, not far from the spring, we have a very tall black walnut with a crook in it that has our resident red-shouldered hawk. A red-shouldered hawk has lived here ever since Dr. Compton was here, and we still have one now that's very territorial. And maybe if we're lucky, he'll fly by and pay us a visit. But not far from the nest is our mayapple. The mayapple produces a small white flower and a small fruit. But to me, they look like fairy garden umbrellas. And they're really kind of enchanting, which I think sometimes our garden is enchanting. It looks very interesting. But the interesting thing about the mayapple is that once the mayapple comes up, the Forest Service no longer allows a controlled burn to take place in the area. So it's kind of a reminder that once it's up, we can't burn any of our areas off. But we still got more to see here down the trail, so let's take a little walk. Right here on the corner of the property, Norm, is the southern magnolia. And as you can see, it's just about ready to bloom. Very beautiful tree we have. In the early 50s, Dr. Compton planted this tree right here. Norm, you might notice that we have kind of yellow petals covering the ground here around the bottom of the base of this tree. This is the Tulip Poplar tree, and it's in bloom this time of year, and we have the flower that looks like a tulip, thus the name Tulip Poplar. But also this tree, because it grows so straight and so tall, they were used to make telephone poles. So this is one of the first trees that was used to make telephone poles because of the way it always grows, so straight and tall. The Tulip Poplar. Just down from that tree, we have an interesting plant called the Devil's Walking Stick. I think you need to see it. Let's go on down and take a look. Norm, right here off the path, we have a a group of trees that are called the Devil's Walking Stick. And if you look kind of close, you can see that they have these long thorns on them. And they'd make a good hiking stick, but you couldn't hold on to them because of the thorns. And that's why they're called the Devil's Walking Stick. But just down the way, we've got another one of our state champion trees, a Yellowwood. So let's not stop here, let's keep going. Norm, one of the other state champion trees we have here on the property is the Yellowwood. And if we could peel back the bark, you'd see that inside the tree, it's colored yellow, how it gets its name. But the tree also produces a beautiful white flower. Now, every year the tree flowers, but every other year it flowers abundantly. Unfortunately, you came this year and we have very few flowers on it. Come back next year and you'll really see it in bloom. Right beside it and across from it is one of the holly trees. And holly trees come in both male and female. And this is the female holly tree, and it'll have the red berries. But the male tree, it doesn't have the red berries. But we have one of each variety, and the male tree is just on up the path. Let's go up that way and see what else we can see. Norm, here's another Yellowwood tree. This one isn't a state champion, but you can see that the white blooms and see how scarce they are on the tree. Give you an idea. When you come back next year, you probably won't even be able to see the green leaves because of all the beautiful white flowers. But right across from this tree is where we put all the azaleas. Dr. Compton really loved azaleas and had them all over the grounds. But we've collected them from throughout the garden and placed them here at the front of their house. They're not in bloom right now, but when they are, it's really a lovely sight. These are azaleas. One of the plants that's just about to bloom on us is the wild hydrangea, and it produces a beautiful white flower. So they're just about ready to bloom. People may be reminded that they have hydrangeas, usually a pink or a blue at home. And the interesting thing about the hydrangea is that if you change the chemistry around the plant, you can change your blue flower to a pink or your pink flower to a bloom. You can't do that with very many plants. One of the last things I'll show you is we have a vine growing up this tree. It has these large limbs coming off of it and these leaves of 3. It's poison ivy. We don't get too close, but we use it for teaching purposes here at the garden. But we have a stand of poison ivy, something you don't really think about when you go to a public garden. Well, Norm, I guess we could spend all day looking at 250 varieties of native plants and 55 species of trees, but I've got places to go and you've got things to do, so I guess that kind of wraps it up here at Compton Gardens. But please remind everybody that we're open year-round, 365 days a year. We open at sunrise, we close at sunset. And no matter what the season we're in, there's something to see here at Compton Gardens. So come give us a visit. And thanks for coming, Norm. We appreciate it. Bye.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed your visit today with John Spurgeon. He's been a great guide and to show us around Compton Gardens here in beautiful Bentonville, Arkansas. You know, God gave us a wonderful world to live in and a place that He's continually showing His hand of creativity, and we've seen some of that today. If you'd like some of the plants or information about Compton Gardens, you can do that by coming right down or just checking out the website right there on your screen. Also a phone number for more information. I would remind you too that Compton Gardens also rents out the facility. Dr. Compton's old house is now available for special meetings and weddings and things of that sort and all kinds of special events. So here we are in beautiful downtown Bentonville, Arkansas on a perfect spring day in 2011. We hope that you've enjoyed today's show as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you, because I've learned a lot of things today. In the meantime, we'll see you again on another Out of the Norm show, somewhere across America, people, places, things, and events, because the stories are always all about you. We'll see you again soon.
Like loving the South and me just loving you. You can't go far from things that south of me.